So a pastor and elder must be this kind of man. Above reproach, back to Titus 1, a one-woman man, and having children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion. Let's look at that text now more specifically. Having children who believe. That is literally what the Greek says. Tekna ekon pista. Having children who believe. Having is present tense. Children has no regard for age at all. In fact, it's the same word used back in verse 4 to speak of Titus, my true child, who was a grown man. It simply means sons and daughters, offspring. And generally speaking, the tone of this text assumes them to be adult. Say, why do you say that? I'll show you in a moment, but primarily it's associated with not accused of dissipation or rebellion. That hardly refers to little children. There aren't too many dissipated, debauched little kids. That is a term which would more accurately be reflective of an adult life. Further, elders by definition were older men who tended to have older children. Some of them did have young children, and that's, I think, referred to in 1 Timothy, as I'll mention in a moment. But the word children here has no regard for age, whatever age they are. If they wanted to talk about little children, he could have used teknion. If he wanted to talk about babies, he could have used brephos. That means infants. But he just uses a general word for sons and daughters. Now, we know that elders could have had young children. He could have had older children. Probably the norm was older children, since by definition they were older men. But many of them surely did have young children as well. It's not an issue of his age. It's an issue that his children believe, and they're not dissipating, and they're not in rebellion, whatever age they are in life. Now let's take that word, children who believe. Who believe? Now if you have an Authorized or King James, it may say faithful. This has been much debated over and over through the years. It's a very debated issue, and in order to try to help bring some clarity to that debate, I'm going to beg the issue a little bit this morning, so indulge me. Some people say it means faithful children, and all faithful children means is they're just obedient to their parents, okay? They don't have to be Christians. This is a big point people make. They don't have to be Christians. They just have to be obedient to their parents. Well, that would assume then that they were little children, wouldn't it? Because do adult children have to be obedient to their parents? No. And I don't think this text could be related to little children, since it says they're not to be accused of dissipation or rebellion. And those terms are very graphic descriptions of wild, unruly, sordid, lascivious living, which would be much more characteristic of older children than little kids. I think here then it's safe to say that he's talking here about faithful adult children, for the most part, who are not going to scandalize the ministry by their unruly, wild living. Now, others are willing to say it does mean, as it's translated properly here in the New American Standard, it means children who believe. But that's the battleground. Some say, no, it just means faithful, obedient children. They don't have to be converted. Others say they do have to be converted. You say, well, now, wait a minute. What if your children don't fit into this category because they're not old enough to believe? They're not at that age yet. They're still little children. Elders could have small children, right? I think 1 Timothy 3 covers that. Paul giving requirements there for one who is an elder. In verse 4, 1 Timothy 3 says he must be one who manages his own household well, keeps his children under control with all dignity. That clearly must refer to younger children, because you don't keep your adult children under control. You're not in the same role with them that you maybe once were. And so I think really you have the emphasis of 1 Timothy 3 on the controlling of the household, the controlling of the children with all dignity, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And in Titus, you tend to see the older child who now believes and whose life follows that belief, not being accused of anything that would scandalize the ministry.